LucasArts once had the kind of resume most studios would kill for. Monkey Island, Grim Fandango, Jedi Knight, and Knights of the Old Republic all sat inside its orbit. This was not just a Star Wars merchandise factory. It helped define adventure games, cinematic storytelling, and licensed action games. Then, in 2013, only months after Disney bought Lucasfilm, LucasArts was shut down, and Star Wars 1313, its boldest-looking future, was left hanging at the finish line. LucasArts began in 1982 as Lucasfilm Games, a small division created while George Lucas was turning Lucasfilm into more than a movie company. At the time, Lucasfilm was experimenting everywhere. Industrial Light and Magic was pushing visual effects. Skywalker Sound was advancing film audio. And inside that same culture, the games group was given an unusual mandate: do not just make Star Wars games. That freedom mattered. The early team was encouraged to build original worlds, test new technology, and treat games as something more than coin-operated reflex tests. Their first projects, like Ball Blazer and Rescue on Fractalus, were not movie tie-ins. They were experiments in speed, simulation, and atmosphere. Then came a deeper shift. Lucasfilm Games started building adventures around characters, dialogue, puzzles, and jokes. The studio moved away from punishing players for every mistake and toward letting them explore a story. If a puzzle was hard, the goal was not to humiliate the player. It was to make the solution feel clever. That design philosophy became the foundation for everything people would later associate with LucasArts. So the question is not whether the studio had creative freedom, it is what it made once that freedom was real. The breakthrough arrived with Maniac Mansion in 1987. Designed by Ron Gilbert and Gary Winnick, it looked like a haunted house comedy, but its real legacy was underneath the screen. Maniac Mansion introduced the SCUM-M engine, short for Script Creation Utility for Maniac Mansion. Instead of typing commands and guessing verbs, players clicked words like open, push, use, and talk to, then combined them with objects in the world. It made adventure games easier to read, easier to control, and far more welcoming. That interface became the backbone of a golden age. The secret of Monkey Island turned pirate fiction into a comedy of insults, rubber chickens, and a hero who wanted to be feared but sounded like a teenager at his first job interview. Day of the Tentacle made time travel feel like a playable cartoon, with puzzles stretching across past, present, and future. Sam and Max Hit the Road pushed the studio's humor into surreal American roadside chaos. Full Throttle gave adventure games biker gangs, industrial sabotage, and a harder edge. Grim Fandango wrapped film noir, Mexican folklore, and the afterlife into one of the most visually distinct games of the decade. The common thread was not just comedy. LucasArts trusted players to experiment. Many older adventure games could kill you for opening the wrong door, or trap you hours later because you missed a tiny item. LucasArts built a different contract. Puzzles could still be strange, even brutal, but the game usually would not punish curiosity with cheap deaths or unwinnable saves. That philosophy changed expectations. Players came to LucasArts for writing, timing, animation, and characters who felt authored rather than assembled from fantasy cliches. The strange irony is that the studio's clearest identity came from worlds it invented itself, right before Star Wars became the safer bet. Star Wars did not replace LucasArts overnight. It pulled the studio into a bigger arena. In the early 1990s, LucasArts began turning the film license into games that felt technically serious, not just branded merchandise. X-Wing, released in 1993, gave players a cockpit, mission briefings, shield management, squadron objectives, and the fantasy of surviving as one pilot inside the Rebel Alliance. A year later, TIE Fighter flipped the perspective and made the Empire playable, not as a joke, but as a full military campaign with its own hierarchy and logic. Then came Dark Forces in 1995. At a time when first-person shooters were still closely associated with Doom, LucasArts used Star Wars to build a more cinematic action game, with vertical spaces, mission goals, and a new protagonist named Kyle Katarn. Jedi Knight expanded that foundation with live-action cutscenes, lightsaber combat, force powers, and branching moral choices. These games were commercial Star Wars products, but they were also design experiments. LucasArts also became powerful as a publisher and license holder. Knights of the Old Republic was developed by BioWare, but it reached the market through LucasArts, using the company's control of the Star Wars game license. That distinction matters. LucasArts was not always the studio building every major title internally, but it was the gatekeeper that could connect outside talent to one of the most valuable fictional universes in entertainment. For a while, the balance worked. Star Wars gave LucasArts dependable sales, and the company still backed games with ambition in story, systems, and technology. The danger was hidden inside that success. Original adventure games required risk, timing, and a specific creative culture. Star Wars, by comparison, arrived with recognition built in. Corporate leadership did not need to hate adventure games to learn the obvious lesson. The galaxy far, far away was easier to sell. By the early 2000s, LucasArts was operating in a market that no longer looked built for the games that had made its reputation. Traditional point-and-click adventures were fading from the mainstream, boxed retail space was more competitive, and publishers wanted recognizable brands that could survive rising development costs. LucasArts still had creative people inside the building, but the company's center of gravity kept shifting towards safer work. Star Wars titles, publishing partnerships, and licensed tie-ins became the dependable pipeline. Some were excellent, like Knights of the Old Republic and Republic Commando. Others felt uneven, rushed, or shaped more by the calendar than by a strong internal vision. That change affected original projects hardest. Full Throttle got a sequel called Payback, then another called Hell on Wheels. Both were cancelled. Sam and Max. Freelance Police was nearly finished when LucasArts shut it down in 2004, arguing that the market was not right for that kind of adventure game. To fans, it looked like the company had abandoned one of the very things it once understood better than anyone. The instability was not limited to old adventure brands. Star Wars projects also ran into shifting priorities. Battlefront 3, developed by Free Radical Design, became one of the most infamous cancellations, with reports that it was far along before collapsing amid disputes and changing expectations. The Force Unleashed arrived with major technical ambition and strong sales, but its sequel was shorter, more troubled, and less convincing as a foundation for the future. Inside LucasArts, projects could be restarted, redirected, or killed as leadership changed and strategies reset. The studio was not empty of talent. It was full of people trying to make games inside a company that increasingly struggled to protect a clear direction long enough for that talent to matter. Disney's later shutdown would feel abrupt, but the drift had been visible for years. Then, in 2012, LucasArts showed something that made the whole decline look reversible. At E3, the studio revealed Star Wars 1313, a darker third-person action game set far below the polished skyline of Coruscant. Instead of Jedi temples and galactic prophecy, the demo followed bounty hunters through the planet's criminal underworld, with cinematic camera work, cover shooting, close-quarters chaos, and a tone closer to a prestige action thriller than a traditional Star Wars adventure. The reaction was immediate, because 1313 did not feel like a studio retreating into nostalgia. It looked expensive, confident, and modern. For the first time in years, LucasArts seemed ready to compete with the biggest narrative action games of the generation on their own terms, using Star Wars as a setting instead of a safety net. It also was not the only project moving inside the company. Star Wars: First Assault, a smaller multiplayer shooter, was being developed as a possible step toward a new Battlefront-style future. Between First Assault and 1313, LucasArts still appeared to have plans, teams, and a path back into relevance. Fans began imagining a comeback, LucasArts as a serious internal studio again, not just the caretaker of old memories. Then the decision that mattered most happened above the studio's head. Lucasfilm was about to be sold. In October of 2012, Disney bought Lucasfilm for about $4.05 billion. The deal included Star Wars, Industrial Light and Magic, Skywalker Sound, and LucasArts. From the outside, it looked like the studio had just gained the backing of one of the most powerful entertainment companies in the world. Inside Disney, the calculation was different. Big internal game development was expensive, slow, and risky. A single project could take years, miss the market, or collapse before release. Licensing Star Wars to outside studios offered a cleaner business model. Disney could collect revenue from partners while avoiding the full cost of building and managing large development teams. In April of 2013, Disney shut down LucasArts as an internal developer. Roughly 150 employees were laid off. Star Wars 1313 was cancelled. First Assault was cancelled. The version of LucasArts that made games, took creative risks, and carried decades of history effectively ended in one announcement. The company name did not vanish completely. LucasArts remained as a licensing label, attached to Star Wars games made elsewhere. But that was a different role. It was no longer a studio trying to invent the next X-Wing, Monkey Island, Jedi Knight, or 1313. That is what makes the shutdown so sharp. LucasArts did not disappear because audiences stopped caring. It disappeared because, on Disney's spreadsheet, licensing looked safer than creation. The twist is that LucasArts had already escaped before Disney closed the doors. Its people had been scattering for years, carrying the studio's habits into the rest of the industry. Tim Schafer, one of the defining voices behind Day of the Tentacle and Grim Fandango, built Double Fine, where strange worlds, sharp dialogue, and character-first design became the whole identity of the company. Ron Gilbert and Gary Winnick kept returning to the adventure game form, proving that the old LucasArts language still had an audience when it was made with care. That lineage also ran through Telltale Games, a studio built by former LucasArts developers after the cancelled Sam and Max sequel. Telltale took the adventure game's focus on dialogue, choices, and episodic storytelling and pushed it into a new era with games like The Walking Dead. Even when the mechanics changed, the basic lesson remained. Players would follow a story if the characters were strong enough. The Star Wars side of LucasArts survived differently. Once the company became a licensing label, outside studios carried the galaxy forward. That model eventually led to major modern Star Wars games from developers like Respawn, where Jedi Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor turned lightsaber combat and exploration into big, focused single-player adventures. So LucasArts did die, as a building, a payroll, and a business unit. But its design language did not die with it. It broke apart, spread through its alumni, and became part of how games tell stories. LucasArts began as an experimental lab, became a genre-defining legend, turned into a Star Wars powerhouse, and ended as a corporate casualty. Disney made the final call, but the drift had started earlier. Thanks for watching. In the comments, tell me which loss hurts most: Star Wars 1313, a cancelled sequel, or the adventure game LucasArts we never got back.